sexual violence, trafficking in women, and prostitution. Women are also the slower of the genders to recover from disasters. The world requires now women's leadership in healing and restoring the nature. Women should have access to adaptation to climate change and play the core role in implementing disaster risk reduction. Regarding the recommendation for gender-respective legislation in an aid of climate change and disaster risk reduction at the national level, the legislative branch of each nation should create laws on the basis of gender mainstreaming in adaptation to climate change and disaster risk reduction, so that women can participate in exercise fluence on and share benefit of adaptation to climate change at local, national, and international level. Gender-responsive legislation relevant to climate change and disaster risk reduction will provide the following: equal participation in the formulation and implementation of climate change policies, and sharing the benefit of market-based approach to curbing climate change, such as a clean development mechanism, and allocating funds for gender-sensitive research in adaptation to climate change and disaster risk reduction, thereby raising awareness among women and encouraging and training women experts in adaptation to climate change response and disaster risk reduction. In many cases, women's environmental movement have taken the form of individual voluntary service activities, but institutional processes have not been widely established to actively monitor and present alternatives on adaptation to climate change and disaster risk reduction. The Green Party of Germany is a good example as a useful way, as a good model for women's participation in adaptation to climate change and disaster risk reduction. For effective adaptation, climate change, and disaster risk reduction, women should participate in politics and introduce gender-responsive legislation in aid of climate change and disaster risk reduction. This requires the further advancement of women in politics and governance. Throughout the world, women's representation has shown eye-opening progress owing to the efforts of both the UN and those of individual countries. As Table 1 demonstrates, the proportion of women legislators grew from 13% in 1990 to 18.3% in 2008. Women accounted for 41.4% of legislators in Nordic countries, 21.4% in the Americas, 19.1% in Europe, OSCE members countries, followed by Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Pacific in 2008. For now, the average rate of female representation at the national parliaments stands at merely 18.3% globally. Although this represents an increase of approximately 5% over the last 2 decades, we must realize that it is clearly insufficient. Although there is a significant comparative variance, for example, between Scandinavian countries and the Arabic states, it can be recognized that women's political participation remains low in general, because nowhere in the world we can find levels of female political participation in excess of 50%. In other words, women still have a long way to go to attain equitable representation for a constituency comprising more than half of the world's population. The ideal of parity between men and women in national legislatures remains distant hope. However, there are countless difficulties, barriers faced by women in their attempt to become legislators. Many are related to procedural obstacles having to do with the nature of politics and the existing political system. Others can be attributed to women themselves. There are not too many women who apply for nomination. The key reason why women are reluctant to become candidates is because politics is considered to be men's realm, not women's. This is due to the socialization process. As women have been educated since they were young, that politics has little to do with them. They have just not seen many women politicians in their lives. There are also cultural factors underlying obstacles to women's political participation. The patriarchal culture of male dominance has provided the most serious impediment to women's political advance in some Asian and Middle East countries. Women were excluded from high positions, for example, in traditional societies, and their role was strictly confined to matters of the home. Women's political participation has been impeded as such historical factors has stood as a dominant cultural feature in most countries, with relatively few exceptions. And regarding the factors impeding, another factors impeding Korean women's political, not Korean, including Korea, all of the maybe Asia, Arab, and some more countries. Besides cultural factors, we can consider the lack of occupational experience in useful field to enter into politics. Women have been forced to have feminine occupation instead of becoming lawyers and professors or a more professional job. And also we can consider as a barrier women's family responsibility and political funds can be a problem. Political culture and consciousness. Many people do not think engaging in politics is not so good job. And party nomination process and election system and size of electoral constituency. And also we can consider the strategies to expand the women's political participation. We can consider all these barriers to expand women's participation in politics, and we have to find out a good solution here after, based upon our discussions.